Hello. I'm really delighted to be joining the Sincere Conference. I'm a little bit nervous about presenting a keynote here online without meeting any of you, and whether I manage my resource and saving it is something that I'm not 100% certain of. But I'm going to proceed, and I'm going to ask your tolerance if something plays up a bit and I don't get it quite right. So first of all, sincere regards and greetings and reaching out to all of you. I wish I could see someone. It's a bit lonely at this end, but let's go for it. I wanted to open up to show you me, so there's a real person talking with you. Now I'm going to share my screen and go through the PowerPoint I've arranged. So I think we're getting it right. Okay, so I called it Inside Outside. In terms of COVID, there's a world outside, we're locked inside, and of course the interactions between those two are much more complex. But there we are. As I made this PowerPoint, I realized that I feel very seriously insulated and isolated in not being able to see you or talk with you. And that made me very uncertain and unsure about what I should say, because in normal circumstances, you meet people, you talk to them, and here I can't. I'm thinking that INSEA, maybe many of you, maybe most of you in INSEA are visual artists, and maybe working alone inside your studio bubble for some of you is not abnormal. And maybe you only share your work on the outside when you're finished. My husband, Jerry, was a visual artist, and to a large extent, that's how he worked. However, I work in drama, and drama happens collaboratively. Not only do we work often, even in a solo show, I imagine, there's something collaborative. If it doesn't happen in the working and in the team that makes the work, then it happens when you work with your audience. Everything that we share with our audience is remade. It's not a pre-packaged thing that we can bring to the audience finished. It's made by drinking in the audience a little bit. I can't see you. I can't see how you react. And similarly, for conferences, for me, are about talking to people. Even in a keynote where, you're up on the podium alone, you've usually previously had a chance to meet some of the people and pick up some of the vibes. And as you speak, you can pick up on the energy and you can read your audience a bit. But here I'm sitting in a COVID bubble at my laptop, talking to myself. And I think, well, that's the reality of lockdown. At this stage, we're in the last quarter of a year that's been totally dominated by COVID. In January was probably the first time some of us began to understand what was happening, but we had no idea it would be like this. In January, I was teaching a team of young people from China, and there were three groups that had come to my university for a 3-week intensive course. And one of the groups was from Wuhan. And so kind of 3 or 4 days after the program started in, around about mid-January, early to mid-January, we got the news that COVID had broken down in Wuhan, that the city was going into lockdown, that it was incredibly serious. And we were pretty confident our people didn't have it, the ones we've met, because they looked healthy, but the anxiety was building. And then March in New Zealand, and each of you are in different places, you have your own dates, but March we went to hard lockdown, level 4, which was the complete lockdown. By June, we had no active cases and we were out of lockdown, but still with borders closed. And then we went back into lockdown in August. Mainly it was Auckland, but I live north of Auckland, and therefore we became an island. We couldn't go anywhere because you had to either drive or fly through Auckland to go anywhere. So overlaid with this has been the border closures. I have a son and grandchildren and a lot of friends in Australia, and it's been over a year now since I've seen my son. I don't know when I'll see him face to face. Many of you have that experience. Politics of accusations and you're doing it wrong, it'd be done like this. If you hadn't done that, you didn't do the border security, etc., etc. The conspiracy theories that have been floating, and that continuous threat of the virus rising globally. We keep getting horrifying news. And some of you who might be participating in that conference, this conference, might be in countries where that rise is the dramatic one. And so, for me anyway, and I'm thinking for many of us, over time our energies and our minds have also got a little bit locked down. Projects have lost momentum. I look at my doctoral students, and many of them have been shut for most of the year in one small room in a flat, trying to write a thesis. No conference to attend, no departmental seminars, no meetings with their other PhD people over coffee, group learning communities, kind of a shutting down of incentive. And I must admit, when I accepted the invitation to do this keynote, I really thought I'd have some more projects running by this time. The lockdown and that mental lockdown, I mean, to be honest, that I haven't. The other thing I want to say in introduction is that I come from a drama background, and I've been in IDEA, which is our International Drama Association, since its birth somewhere way back 1990 something. And I've participated in a couple of World Alliance of Arts conferences where INSEA and the other arts and IDEA have come, and 2 others have come together. But I feel that I'm at a slightly different part of the arts spectrum from many of you. There are many, many commonalities across the arts, both in the kind of the fire we have, that look, and the kind of commitment we have to making, and also in using arts for education. But there are also really significant differences. So I'm not going to attempt to cover the spectrum. I will be focusing on using drama as a medium for learning. And before I move to my next slide, I just want to reflect on some of the things that have changed. The 2 top photographs are of hands touching, and this was an important part of a kind of a warm-up in one of the exercises I might do, of just that pure sensory experience of other people's hands. The other one was one where it was movement without losing connection. So one part of the body would be, in that case, the hands, and we would move as widely as we can, manipulating the space without losing connection. Both of those things in today's environment are not possible. They're in the no-nos. And instead, I've picked from the internet the image of the complete masking. Okay, maybe we don't walk around like this, but it's a very interesting representation of the mask, the shield, the protection. So in the first part of this presentation, I just want to look a little bit at what's happening on the outside. Here we are, and where we are in relation to it on the inside. Here we are in our bubble. Isolated, insulated, a dangerous virus around us, a separation from all those connections that we normally take naturally. But one thing, the virus itself, our fear of it, our doubt about it now today is it's infectious. You seem to sometimes only have to touch a handrail to pick it up, it seems, from one of the cases we've had in our country. It's mysterious. We don't really know enough about it. Does it respond to this, etc., etc.? You've gone through all the news yourself and you know it. As well as our virus, we've seen an increase in what Schechner would call acts of public theatre. Demonstrations, people coming together to make strong statements, strong physicalized, emphatic statements about race, about power, sometimes about their own political interests, sometimes about their own sectarian kind of feuds and angers, human rights. And this sometimes clashes with what we know about the virus. But the other thing that clashes is we feel distanced from it. It's like a riot, a tornado that's around us, but we know about, react with in one way, but are more than usually unable to react to. Truths and speculations. I guess one of the latest one that's been rounding is President Trump really got COVID or not? Just one example. Was this artificial? Was it a conspiracy? Is it really dangerous? So many kind of flavors of what can we really trust? And of course, a sense of standing on an economic brink. So outside, there is a world that, to put it mildly, is chaotic, dangerous, risk-filled. And we, locked in our bubble inside, the popular notion, and sometimes it was echoed in our TV and in your news, no doubt too, is of a family being able to be together. Time, getting to know each other better. Yes, there were restrictions. Yes, it was an imposition and an inhibition, but families can make the most of it. But for many, the reality is isolation in a small space, without the bubble of joy, without the giggling. For old people, for those who live alone, for all my international doctoral students who might have had flatmates, but probably never really talked much to them before, because the flat was one where you just rented a room. It wasn't a familial kind of flat. So complete isolation. And with it, roads blocked. Just as a little tiny example, not only can I not see my family in Australia at the moment, but I was due for knee surgery just before our last lockdown. And while the surgery could have gone ahead because it was in a part of New Zealand that wasn't locked down, I couldn't pass through Auckland. The airlines cancelled my flight. And so I'm sitting here now, post-surgery, yeah, at a time when I thought it would have been well over and done with. The cartoon I've put up here is from, as many of you will recognize, Back to the Future. Doc is saying to young man, Marty, whatever happens, don't ever go to 2020. 2020, people have described as a horrible year. COVID, the conspiracy theories, for many people, unemployment, for some, the prospect of financial ruin, increasing racial unrest everywhere, sometimes even militant uprising on both sides of these divides. In my country, we have an election in 2 weeks, and that's created so much politics politicizing about COVID and about everything. So it's really hard to know, hey, what are the realities? Who's exaggerating here? Gossip, lies, and social media, and not only social media, actually news media. It's at the moment that the news media is dominating the politics rather than reporting it. We've had the weather changes. Here in my part of the world, we had what they called a 1 in a 500-year storm and flood. I'm not banking it won't happen again next year. So my basement downstairs was flooded and almost began to grow mushrooms. Walls had to get pulled out, and I'm still waiting for repairs. Wildfires throughout America, but also, we've had little touches of them even here. The burning of refugee camps, which was on the news some time ago. And the question, so given these things, what is it in our international politics that forces us to keep making the refugees? So we have the refugee camps. The polar ice is sliding away. And in my own country, we had the trials of the mosque shooter, which also created another level of anxiety at the beginning of last month. So 2020 is a tough year. In all this complexities, and I've just thrown some words up there, art is in a position, not automatically, it's got to go there, but not automatically, of being able to witness, record, interpret what's happening, to be able to critique it and ask questions about it, and to try and make some form of sense out of it. I've picked a few quick examples, again, largely from the internet, about, first one is from graffiti on a wall in Berlin, with, of course, the toilet paper crisis, and of course it's from the Lord of the Rings, where he says, "Oh, my precious," when he's holding the ring, here it's the roll of toilet paper. I think two lovers kissing through the mask speaks for itself. The one on the lower, I don't know if it's left or right when you look at it. Anyway, the one that says grocery shopping done was one that a friend of mine in Malaysia put up. It's him dressed up in combat gear. I've done the grocery shopping. It's an experience many of you know. And similarly, on the other side, one from a mayor of one of our small towns in New Zealand, dressed up as a spaceman, masking to go shopping, the big adventure. So art making provides a medium that we can look at what's happening. And it's got I'm calling it a critical yet visceral. Yeah, the mind, but also some kind of gut reaction. So when we look at these, they speak to our head, they speak to our emotions, they speak to something, let's call it our nerve endings, I don't know. And we can explore, we can ask questions, and maybe make some kind of sense of both how we feel inside this trap bubble and what's happening in the world around us. And I'm going to pick up on one of the other things that's been in the media a lot, of course, masks. Masks are the big thing everywhere. And there's been some great music, there's been great songs. The two bottom images here are the ways we saw masks often in the past. One of them was I picked one that was labeled on the internet as a bank robber. A man who's a criminal covering his face so he can't be recognized. And the second one was the veiled woman, the Muslim woman who is masked, who is not allowed our identity as we interpret it often. And those have been our kind of dominant ideas of what masking means. And now we wear masks. And so the three at the top are ones that have played with us The transparent mask is wonderful. It came up partly because of a refusal to be shut down, partly also because of people who said, but it's so for those for hard of hearing, they need to lip read. The friendly lion, and of course the green lettuce leaf. Provocative, tongue-in-cheek, but also serious, you know? The mask is a life giver, maybe. And so there's a sense of play and of improvisation that goes together with what is becoming a ritual of wearing masks. And I want to stay at that idea of ritual for a little longer. I'm turning to Richard Schechner, who positions ritual as the source and kind of an ongoing reference point from which we can look at the whole spectrum of theatre and drama. He positions it at the extreme end of entertainment. And he looks at it as it's the beginnings, the prehistoric beginnings of where drama comes from. Drama, as Schechner explains it, ritual, as Schechner explains it, is performed, it's efficacious, it has a result. It isn't just something. Doing the performance makes something happen. And the key elements need to be precisely enacted. And that's unlike our mask wearing. So the actors here have direct agency. When we wear the mask, we actually activate something. The audience is the community of belief and practice, and the dramatic symbol in the mask here is central. So some of the modern contemporary rituals that work in that way, the marriage ceremony, whatever the frills that are put on it, the efficacious part is the words, I do. And the ring is, of course, its dramatic symbol. Graduation. The actual passing of the diploma on the stage. The Catholic Mass. At that moment of the transubstantiation, the words of the priest turn the water and the wine into the body and blood of Christ. And from my own country, New Zealand, the porphyry, the ritual of welcome, so that when people come on the marae, Maori meeting ground, when the visitors come and they're met by the home people, there is a ceremony where at the beginning of which they're alien and at the end of which they've become melded together. As they share food, they have become one group. And so the post-COVID rituals that are perhaps most obvious, the lining up outside the supermarket. In New Zealand, we've had the 2-meter paces marked with kind of a slightly iridescent-y acid, bright yellow, so you step up. You carefully choose the conversation you can make. The clicking, the COVID tracer app. So, you know, there's symbols of them, each one having its thing where you go into each shop or somewhere and you click it. And okay, yes, it's an act that it's just a simple recording, but it becomes a ritual as everybody lines up outside the hardware store. It's when we're not fully locked down, outside the hardware store or the cafe, and ritually clicks. And of course, hand washing everywhere, and the mask. So in itself, I think that COVID is engaging us in performative rituals that, as some of the images I showed you before, invite us to deconstruct and play with. And there's lots of fun you could have with all of them. I'm going to also look at two events that where art tried to break through the lockdowns. The first one was Auckland Theatre Company created a Zoom version of Chekhov's The Seagull, where both the rehearsals and the actual performance happened entirely in Zoom, where each character was in a different space and the plot evolved through the Zoom interactions. a reinterpretation, if you like, of Chekhov's play, exploring the isolation, the fractured communication that's latent in the play, but was meaningful to us. And the other one I just mentioned quickly and lightly that I participated in was singing in an international community choir led by Steve Taberner with over 400 members. And for me, it was so fantastic. It was kind of had people from Spain, from England, from Australia, some of us from New Zealand. It was fantastic connecting with all those faces, all those people. But in terms of joining a choir, it didn't work for me at all. There was no way I could sing in tune alone in my room. I think I might have done it. I'm not a good one. I need the vibration of the voices around me to get anything out that sounds even remotely like the right note. So that was 2000. After 2000, have we finished? Yeah, we might get a vaccine, perhaps. Virus mutate, will there be other pandemics? Who knows? You know, this is a new era that we don't know much about its unfolding. As well as the old COVID, I think we acknowledge the fact that there will be increasingly violent weather. There will probably be more fires. In all probability, there will be growing political divisions. I don't, for one moment, have hope that it will be easier to see the difference between truth and propaganda. There will probably be more displacement of people. There'll probably be fluctuating economics. In other words, the world won't come back to beautiful and normal. Oh, it's unlikely. So we can perhaps use art to understand what's happening and to make some kind of meaning. What does it mean? How do we do it? How is this happening? What is it in the face of problems? And to explore ways of perhaps making change. I'm not talking about the big idealistic changes. I'm talking about the small changes that make it possible for us to survive. And one of the reasons we can use art, and I'll go into more, is because art is something that involves a large part of us. We're body as well as mind. We communicate through senses, not just words. We know through senses and not just words. We know things in other ways than intellectual. And art, both the making of it, the participation in it, the talking through it and with it, help us do those things. It's timely perhaps to ask, what skills do our young people need in order to face the future? What values do we need to inculcate in them? And there are many. I'm not presuming for one moment to give you a list, but I want to emphasize that we need to preserve the capacity to share, to love, to empathize. And this is a capacity that is threatened by lockdown and by our isolation into bubbles. We need to help them to evolve flexibility and resilience so that whatever comes, they have some increasing capacity to roll with the punches, to find new ways of being, to deal with it. We need to help them, again, important in times of lockdown, to retain a sense of team and community. Because team is under threat of disappearing. And we need to help them develop, as always, criticality and ingenuity. I'm going to run through some ways that I think drama offers some special potentials for learning and teaching. Some of them are somewhat what I've said before. It is experiential. When we do drama, we do stuff. It's imagined. We can go outside the fixed reality in front of us and go further. It is embedded in our bodies, and we do make something happen. So I'm going to run through 6 things that, in my mind, are particularly useful and functional in the use of drama for learning. The first one is the development of agency. Drama means doing something. It's not about sitting at the back of a desk or reading a book. It is about moving and doing something, at the very least. And not only is it physically about doing something, it's about being agentic and thinking about what to do. So I'll just leave that for a moment. Drama uses role, not always, but role is a very important part of drama. It's one of its biggest tools. And so role allows us to contain something within that role that we might be afraid to do if we weren't in role. It allows us to take a positionality that's opposite to what we actually believe in order to play with it. It allows us to think, hey, this other point of view that somebody holds, the one I'm disagreeing with, maybe the one who is the white supremacist, who is being anti-Black, if I was to take their role, what is it like inside them? Drama allows us to frame conflict. That doesn't mean that the conflict can't jump out of the frame, but allows us to put, for the time when we're working with it, a box. This is the only bit we're working with. And I talked about rituals before. One of the rituals I particularly like in drama is having either a physical or imaginary chest, where when we leave the drama space, we lift the lid, we put our role and the conflict we worked with inside the box to pick up next time we come in, but we don't take outside the room. Within the, I suppose, the repertoire, the kind of the thick practice library of skills that have been developed in drama, there's a huge number of strategies for analysis and deconstruction. I'll refer very briefly to 2 of them. One of them is Boal's idea of forum theatre, where a problem can be analysed by the members of the audience who come up and take role and play it through in particular ways. Dorothy Heskett's processes and all the people who've grown from her and bridged out to specific strategies for looking at deconstructing, turning upside down, questioning. Yeah, there's a wide range of skills that have been developed there. Drama also, especially when we use it in teaching, involves group work. And so group work is about communicative skills, but it's also about commitment. If you're part of a group, then it's not just up to you whether you turn up or not. You're a part of a group. And it requires focus. It requires letting go of something so you can work together to make the group work. And a word I like to play with, because drama involves performance, whether it's to an audience or just showing what you've been working on in improv. It allows preformance. I'm thinking particularly of work I've seen where students have explored, in one school I was allowed to join this, with students exploring domestic violence, and particularly violence to children. And as they performed their analysis of what was happening, they were beginning to pre-form themselves as adults who were going to take a critical stance to their relationships. No, they didn't know all the answers, but they were beginning to shape and form them. So those are the things that I think make drama a powerful medium. And then I ask myself, when we're shut in our bubbles, when we're shut inside, how can we use drama to look at what's going on outside? Because many of our activities are blocked. The top picture, the woman on the outside holding the woman around the waist like this, it's a no-no now. And many of the other tactile things that are happening in the other photographs, they're not things we can do. Partly the things that are not allowed, but many of our schools are shut. or at least have reduced their activities. Clubs and youth groups are shut. Yeah, there is no touching. We have masked faces and muffled voices. So is it possible to work with the elements and tools of drama if we're socially isolated? And I'm tempted to say in lockdown, really not very much. Yeah, I've given a couple of things we could do in the next slides, but no, drama is an interactive, physical and social art media. And if we reduce it only to what we can do on Zoom, it's not drama as we knew it. This kind of work is at risk in lockdown. An ongoing analytic reflection is a big part of the process. Instead of to stop something and sit down together and talk about, well, what's happening here? It's not just about performing. But can we do it when we're masked and a little bit socially isolated? Possibly. Yeah, but it's going to take rethinking. In the next slide, I've put up kind of a breakdown of some of the range of what things are in drama. And I'm suggesting that when we're working with drama in education, in my way of working with it, we're working particularly with improv and devising, with process drama, maybe with ritual, a little bit of scripted theatre, but my own work's been less involved with that. It's those three areas, not so much kind of the actor training or, yeah, improv, devising, process drama, ritual. So I'm going to go through two possibilities of what we could do. I've loved working with sock puppets. They're so easy to make. And if they look a bit nonsensical like my one does here, so much the better in a way. So we're on a Zoom and we're working with kids, young kids, maybe even older ones, but definitely with young kids. We can liven up the meeting with sock puppets. They're easy to make, they're easy to handle. Kids themselves can make them. And they're a great way to express slightly uncomfortable feelings and ideas. The puppet can say things that the teacher or the child doesn't want to say. Puppet can argue. For example, got a meeting, say, online, and we start, and I've got my puppet here, the blue one you can see in the slide. And I'm saying to my group of kids, hello, how are you? I'm fine, I say. My puppet looks at me and says, Janinka, you can't be fine. You were crying this morning. You're not telling the truth. Well, I was a bit sad. I kind of felt a bit depressed about being locked down, but I'm okay. You sure? So it opens up a dialogue, yeah? And there's many, many things you could do with it. I've had a lot of fun working with puppets in the past like that, where puppet can comment on, the teacher might be, for instance, criticizing a group of young primary children, somebody's not paying attention to their maths. And the puppet says, come on, don't be so tough. Have a good look. She's got a little bit of the answer there or something, yeah? And people can talk to the puppet. They won't talk to me. They can tell the puppet things. And the puppet never keeps secrets, but says, you have to know I'll be telling the teacher this after you've gone, but I won't tell her till afterwards, or something like that. So it's a great device. The other one is a more structured drama situation, which could happen. I planned this drama live in the flesh, but it could happen just as easily in complete social isolation on Zoom, but with some limitations. So here's the opportunity to take some important news item. I picked the one where there'd been one of our newspapers where a man had broken out of a quarantine isolation hotel. And so it's a way of developing, a very easy way of developing a docodrama. I'll run through it very quickly. Picking a news event that has something significant that is worth exploring. And then selecting 4 roles. I like to work in groups of 4, but it could be 5 or it could be 3, whose viewpoints would be different, but useful in illuminating the issue. And one of the things I always talk through with the participants is, we're going to try and be that person. We're not going to caricature them or vilify them. And remember, each person thinks they're in the right. They have reasons for doing what they're doing. And then we write a monologue, or each participant writes a monologue that doesn't take too long from each point of view. It's just their own monologue, and I don't actually worry too much what's in it. If it's gone off the rails, yeah, teacher intervention, but normally just let it go. And then cut the monologue into 4 to 5 sections and then layer them as a collage. And of course, how you layer them is part of the story that's being told. So the way I've done it live is that the characters stand in the same physical space, but they're in completely different areas as they narrate. They don't are aware of each other. In Zoom, of course, that's relatively easy. Whether you pick images to go with the topic, they can be illustrative or kind of counterpunctual so that they work against the image, which it could be projected, or you could leave that part out if we're working in Zoom. And together these create a docodrama. So I put these 2 examples up as just small illustrations of, yeah, we can do it, even with limited resources. But I want to part of this presentation in talking about 8 checks for using drama to learn about big issues. Using any of the arts, drama or the others, of course, is not a magic wand. Just doing it doesn't help us understand or critique or even feel comfortable with. We've got to actually strategize. So I'll just run through the 8. And I'm not saying the 8 are exclusive, there might be more. Firstly is the need to create a platform to work from. You could call it a frame, a point of entry, something that allows us to come in. Most of the issues that we are confronted with in the discussion that I raised before are big issues. And because of their bigness, they're very hard to deal with. We either might take kind of pre-learned positions or what our families want or what we've always done in the past, or we just feel they're too big, so we just reduce them to generalities. And we need to come into something that's little, that's kind of human, that's doable. So I'm just giving some examples. One that I've worked with for lots of different dramas that go in different directions is there's people on the hill and there's people in the valley, and the people in the hill and the people in the valley don't get on at all. But in particular, the people in the hill look down at the people in the valley, physically as well as socially. And then one day, a young gang decides to graffiti the walls, one of the walls that leads into the valley. And I asked my participants what did they write? Now, if I asked them to just write racist graffiti, they wouldn't, because they're nice people, mainly, and they wouldn't want to write. But now they didn't write this graffiti. They know that people write this kind of graffiti. So they just have to think, what kind of graffiti did those people write? So they recreate the graffiti. It's relatively easy. They're taking role. One way, yes, they are taking role. They're kind of taking the role of a researcher, commentator, but they're not taking the role of a participant in the drama. And then, as the teacher facilitator invites the participants to imagine a scene in the pub where a writer talks about the graffiti. And we might create little flashes of that scene so that people just create little bits of dialogue spurting out. And the next scene changes to a home in the valley where at dinner time, one member of the family talks about what they saw on their way home. And then it's small, it's easy. Then the drama can build an exploration of one of the big polarizations that's happening in our world. It's also really important right from the outset, and I made this one of the first things, to create opportunity for thought, for reaction that's emotional and intellectual, and for creativity. just using drama doesn't stop us being, or any of the arts, doesn't stop us being a top-down teacher. Yeah, or asking people to just copy things. I took part in a workshop some years ago with an excellent drama educator whose work I sincerely admire for many reasons. But in this particular case, I think it went haywire a bit. He had introduced the workshop as one using the play Antigone, you know, where Antigone defies Creon. And he introduced it as an exploration of democracy. So that was the key thing, democracy. And in the drama, we built a ruined city by civil war, and we began to enact it. And then the facilitator came in as Creon and asked us to support him to bring law and order. And somehow, from the mood in the room, we refused. It kind of began with a couple of people defying, and others picked up, and we actually told him no, there was no way we're going to do it. And the facilitator stopped the session. We had lunch, came back, and he picked it up. Creon, I've established law and order. And the democracy parts of the work actually went out the window. It's something that could happen any time, but the point I want to make is if we're using drama just to get the response we want, to replicate the wisdom that we already know, to make sure that there's a direct line of action, maybe we're not using drama to the best of its potential. So I've given a little example of how we can build up a little bit of, no, I'm not dealing with something big like that one, but we can engage, so there's some room before we even begin the drama of positionality and some action. Example, an old man in a refugee camp always carries a cigar tin in his pocket. He lost it when the fire started in the camp. Boy found it. It contained a sketch map, a smooth stone, a scrap of lace, and a torn letter. And the task is to create a very short scene where one of these items came into the man's life long ago that shows why that item was precious to him. And so we've created something that wasn't given directly first, that allowed some creativity by the participants. Then we can build onto what made him a refugee, what happened in the camp, all those things. Number 3, bridge from the known to the less known. As I said before, we meet many of the big issues as big generalized abstractions. Racial bigotry is wrong, etc., etc. Drama invites us to look beyond that general, or not beyond it, through it, into it, to examine the human and the particular. And to be able to do that, at each stage of the drama, learners need to be able to lean on and play with what they already know before reaching into the unknown. So coming back to my example, to the graffiti drama I talked about 2 slides ago, the graffiti drama starts without role. Participants just have to recall graffiti they've already seen. They don't have to create anything new, unless they want to, and they can. And then they take role, and when they take role, they already have something to build on. That graffiti already exists. They have something they've seen. And each frame they work in builds a platform of background knowledge that can be used for the next frame. The 4th one is the facilitation of the capacity to develop multiple viewpoints. Inevitably, in our everyday lives, we already have particular attitudes to issues in the world. And also, I think inevitably, our minds tend to merge new information into what we already hold. For example, in the image below, if you look at it for a moment, it does look like that promontory of land, the cliff, is reflected in the water. And when you look at it a bit more, you realize, but it isn't. That's nothing like that reflection. It's a completely different landform. So drama invites us to fracture that viewpoint and see that what we take for granted is going to be that way, maybe isn't. And as we step outside ourselves into a different role and find different ways of seeing, this allows some of the shifts. Again, a very small, easy little example. I often use traditional stories in my work at the beginning of them. So the traditional story of the billy goat's gruff and the troll that lives under the bridge. You know, the billy goat in the traditional story, it's about the billy goats, and they have to cross the bridge because the wicked troll wants to eat them, and they trick the troll in various ways until they get across the bridge and eat the nice fresh grass on the other side. And so when I work with this, I encourage my participants to develop, and I have different strategies for doing it, accounts of troll behavior and troll culture through their eyes. We might build statues of the wicked troll. We might create scenes at home where they eat vulgarly, or where they learn to be vicious at school, or whatever we like, yeah? And then after we've played with this for some time, to establish quite clearly that as teacher, I pick up the narrative and I say, and that's how the billy goats really saw it for their generations. But, you know, the trolls are actually the guardians of this river, the ancestral guardians. They've looked after this waterway for a long time. And, you know, we know that goats, I mean, I've had goats and they've come on they've eaten all the plants in my garden. They've even eaten the clothes on clothesline sometimes. Goats can cause a lot of damage. They just eat anything. So what would it look like if we went over and looked at what the billy goats look like through the troll eyes, and we redevelop our history, our cultures, etc. Little exercise. The fifth one I've put is developing a safe or manageable space. And the concept of drama creating a safe space is already widely discussed, and it's also been intelligently contested. Yeah, so I'm not going to use the word safe as being insulated from challenging ideas or uncomfortable discoveries, nor about the fact that you can always guarantee that people won't try and bring something unsafe into the drama. I think you can stop it, but you can't guarantee it won't come in or begin to come in. But what happens is that using role and using the fiction of role creates a space where we can make allowances and we can suspend criticism. But that exploratory space, which we're being encouraged to take risks in, does need to be managed. And that's where the safety comes, both by the teacher and by the learners who the teacher teaches to do it. So again, I'll return to my billy goat's gruff example in a way that the safety was created. Some years ago, a colleague and I were able to take a workshop in Mostar, Bosnia, where the Civil War was not so long ago, and where the broken bridge, the bridge that had been bombed during the Civil War, the historical ancestral bridge of Mostar, had just been rebuilt. And we use the story of the billy goat's gruff and the troll to create a very careful entry into the sectarian wars that had devastated the city and the people. If we'd gone in and talked about religion and massacres, we might have either met with silence or cliches. It could have been dangerous. It certainly wouldn't have, I think, been productive immediately. But once we played with the billy goat's gruff in a completely neutral space, then at a certain point, the participants themselves slightly started drawing in some of the parallels. And it was our intention. And in time, we were able to move that drama to explore recent history, to look at futures. in a way that we couldn't have done if we hadn't created the safety first. And one of the, of course, the dangers is violence. I'm going to talk about opportunities to record and create violence in the drama without losing control. And of course, the worst possible loss of control is actual physical violence occurring in the drama, somebody getting hurt. But it may have other dangers. But often violence is an integral part of the story, and it's got to be told. And then sometimes we have a drama where some people are captured by want to do some of the horror stuff and want to play with it. And of course, it can be quite dramatically catastrophic, like it's just carnage. So acting with violence and horror can be bad drama, just unconvincing. It can get uncontrolled, it can be dangerous. So we have to use performative strategies. One of the ones I like to use is perhaps developing a photo essay using freeze frames or body sculptures of war, so that all the attention goes into a really thoughtful description, but it's frozen. There's no movement of where that violence, and it can be as graphic as possible, but it doesn't move. And so all the thinking's gone into it without the actual physical danger and without the kind of continued playing and playing and playing with it. I've been in dramas where sometimes we've had an impossible rescues. Like I had a one where it involves a refugee group before they become refugees, and they're being threatened by the coming of the police, the army. And my participants simply wanted to use ninja tricks and defeat the army. And if I'd stopped it there and said, you can't do that, it would have destroyed something for them. So I let them play out the ninja tricks. And then when we'd finished, I brought it back and said, and of course, that's exactly what the people in our story wished, hoped, prayed they could do. That there was some power they had with themselves, just like that, to defeat the enemy. But in fact, they couldn't. And then I take them through to the next part of the story. So it's about accepting them and re-narrating them. Or I let them play out the horror fantasies, but make them into the dreams that the people had that night. So it's about allowing violence, but in very, very controlled circumstances. 7, it's got to have tension. You know, although we control violence, although we build things slowly, if there's no tension, it's boring. There's just no fun. And not only that, learning only happens when we don't know the answer, when there's a challenge that interrupts the narrative. And so the skill here is about the facilitator allowing the storyline to develop long enough to make it believable for the participants before intervening with the challenge. So, the story about the valley and the hill, but the interruption. Somebody from the valley and the hill fall in love with each other. Romeo and Juliet, Othello. Or somebody on the hill needs to borrow money, somebody in the valley. Merchant of Venice. The man with the cigar tin is young and he's offered a choice. You can go on that boat and take only one member of your family. And finally, there is art, there is craft in using drama for learning. It's not necessary, I believe, for the facilitator or the learners to be great actors. I think role is more about commitment than skill. But in particular, the facilitator needs to be a skilled craftsman in selecting where to go in making dramatic inventions, enabling reflection. It's the skill in the facilitator that shifts random play, which is also good, into potential for learning. So, for example, when we looked at the graffiti drama I talked about earlier, We can peer through the window of each house to listen what's discussed at the dinner table. And the facilitator decides when to shut the shutters and move us on to the next house. Example. Finally, to sum up, in a lockdown COVID world, we're trapped inside, and the world outside is turbulent, raging, dangerous, and sometimes beyond our comprehension. By using drama, we can take some little ownership of what's happening outside. We can filter it through our imagination, we can play with it, we can process it, make some kind of sense of it, and we mark it. And so the outside becomes a resource for us to utilize inside, and our inside is able to reach out to the outside. And at the risk of being a little bit too idealistic, I would suggest that, yeah, we may not be able to change the outside to a great extent, but we can change our way of being within the outside. And finally, some references. So I'm now opening up, I hope, for questions. I don't know how this online conference is going to go, whether it will be live and I can come back online for you for questions, or how it will go. But if there are questions, I'd love to get them, or discussion, or any kind of dialogue. And otherwise, I wish you enjoyment of being allowed to meet, at least online. Thank you.